So this is a abbreviated training. When we have them pre-scheduled, we kind of pad it out to an hour and a half, which allows for more examples to be shared. In this particular case, we're going to stick to right under an hour so that we're able to ensure that you have some time to kind of decompress and process any of this. So the idea will be that maybe no more than 15 minutes will be the presentation, and you'll have plenty of time to ask some in-depth questions. But I will take a pause before some of our major switch on topics about the type of documents, so that if you have a question about what had just been presented, you can ask those questions. This is how we're dividing up the presentation. The first part is just defining a bunch of the big picture items, and the major section 2 is the actual paperwork that's involved with procurement for accessibility. Let's cut to part of the chase. So when your colleague included you in this conversation, they had already experienced, okay, what do I need to do? We have somebody who needs to get some kind of tech. When somebody's talking about this, they're not just talking about software, even though a lot of people think that's all it is. It's actually a different term, which we'll expand on in just a little bit. But let's say the scenario is that anything that basically requires more than electricity, than more than a toaster, more than a refrigerator, app, website, subscription, data sets, those will require our office to be involved. We are looking for 2 documents for a fully, let's move ahead, no special paperwork to do. In the screen that I've captured on the right side of your slide is the highlight for accessibility statement and a voluntary product accessibility template report, or a VPAT. We'll define those in section 2. We research it. If you put it on us, we're glad to do that. If you, or when you become more adept at finding out what is being requested, you're welcome to do some of this initial research on behalf of your requester. Sometimes we'll need to send out an email to the vendor asking for this stuff because not everything seems to be available. And we're hoping that if the vendor has some shortcomings in terms of this paperwork, that they're willing to work with us to come up with it, either in the short term or the long term. Okay. So we're going to come back to that scenario, the purchase, so you'll know that there are things we're looking for, what are good things, what are not good things, and what an exception process is if you can't get those items. The Office of Accessibility Resources has a proactive orientation. This is not the same. It might be related to, but not the same as the Disability Resources Center, which supports students. Our motto is accessibility is for everyone, while accommodations are for individuals. So that means that accommodations are a reactive process. And in the case of the Disability Resource Center, they're really focused on providing services for students that are in 4-credit courses, or in the case of those who are going through specialized non-credit courses in continuing education, those students that are in those specialized course offerings. The Office of Accessibility Resources, or OAR, has these particular mandates. We're responsible for ensuring that digital documents, PDFs, Word files, PowerPoint presentations, web pages are delivered to both the public and internal and external visitors, and this can include our students. They are able to be judged and used accessibly. Accessibility doesn't mean, oh, I can download it. Accessibility means that when somebody has a disability, they're able to use their specialized equipment and or software to absorb correctly, knowledgeably created documents so they can have predictable visits, navigation, and travels through those particular items. If it's a software product, they can use a keyboard or voice only commands in the absence of them being able to use a mouse. Because you can imagine that even though you're using your hand and wrist to move a mouse, for somebody who's blind, it also requires vision. And if somebody has low vision, they may not be able to see that clearly. So these are the kinds of things that have to be dealt with. When we're doing purchasing, there's something related. And in the middle of these two choices is the training, like what you're going through right now. So training, documents, and accessibility for procurement. Why do we keep using this fancy word procurement? Well, one, we have this process that as of January 2020 meant that we needed to be involved in ensuring that things that were purchased were accessible. But OAR is only a part of a bigger umbrella where purchasing is involved. So purchasing is really the exchange of funds, whereas procurement is this broader idea of gathering, vetting, planning the acquisition of stuff. So purchasing is just a transactional bit. So we are not involved in the actual money exchange. We are part of the bigger gathering process. So that's why we use procurement when we talk about our role in accessibility and your acquisition, your department's acquisition of information and communications technology, or ICT. When we talk about the two of these together, they're within a scope that's actually defined in the UNLV policy that was approved by a committee for the university back in January 2020. We don't actually review products. What our office does is curate the documentation that should exist when a vendor wants to do business, in particular with the public and or public institutions or agencies. UNR has a similar process. Northern Arizona University has a similar process. California State University Northridge has a similar process. We're all gathering this documentation. How far we go and what we do with some of these different bits of information may vary, but overall we have similar processes. This is a quick overview of the scope of the items that come into what we have to approve. When you interact with purchasing, they already know what is in the scope. So it doesn't really save a whole lot of time to push back on purchasing when you use a P card to do your purchase and they send it back to us and you say, oh, but it's this, this, and this. If they're kicking it back for our approval, they know that the item that is being procured is within this scope. And I've divided the scope across these three screens so it's a little easier to read. I'll highlight some of the key ones that you're typically going to encounter in your procurement adventures. Websites. If somebody in your unit decides, oh, they want to create a website of their own and not work with the prescribed unit on campus, Web and Digital Strategies, to do these, then the service that they want to do the website hosting on, we vet. Anything delivered in digital form is a huge catch-all for almost everything. Like I said, if it's more than a toaster, more than a refrigerator, it's covered in that phrase. Ebooks, things that you use to read ebooks, search engines and databases. You will have a lot of people that are wanting to get certain data sets for their research. The data sets in the databases are in the scope. Learning management systems like Canvas, we call it Web Campus here, classroom technology, lots of things. Information kiosks, ATMs, transaction machines like you have in the student union. You have a lot of items that fall under the idea of software, but as you can see, It's not just about software. When we encounter a request, what everybody on both sides of the desk are hoping for is what we would call a Plan A procurement. That means that the vendor, the corporate entity, has an accessibility statement or a commitment statement, it's like a mission statement, but about accessibility. And they have a per product VPAT or voluntary product accessibility template. I'm going to pause here and just want to confirm if you have any questions over what I've mentioned and covered so far.
No questions so far.
Okay, so we'll proceed into the accessibility statement. The statement is a way for a vendor to demonstrate what accessibility means to them and how they want to demonstrate that commitment. A lot of vendors will have these days a privacy statement. They'll have a modern slavery statement. They will have a security statement. Some of them will have some other kinds of statements about sustainability. What we're asking for falls into a similar location. In some cases, there is a special kind of paperwork called an HECVAT, HECVAT, where they have a number of tabs that address some of these topics. Accessibility, when they use this document, is held within that. So that is an acceptable document to have when they don't have a standalone accessibility statement. But if they don't have it articulated in one way or the other, that is a missing piece of those two that we need to have. An accessibility statement that we find to be useful and acceptable for our use as a curated approved document has to have at least two parts. First, the acknowledgement or statement about their commitment to accessibility, and then number three, a contact person or conduit like an email address, contact form, follow-up form, so that you can be able to register concerns even if you're not yet a customer. In the middle is a crucial but not absolutely required item about the standard applied. Number two is not so critical if there is a VPAT. Since we require both, I'll explain later where the number two missing would be a concern for not being part of a statement. Most of the time, when a corporate entity has a statement, they're going to have all three. They either have nothing or all three. If they include some of these other items here, that's fine, but we want those essentials on the previous slide. As I said, if the HECVAT is available, there is that item that's in place, but a lot of the entities happen to have both. You'll get a copy of the presentation after. So Zoom, Adobe, Sidearm, Sports Instructure, with Mixed Canvas, Cengage, those links will be available. You'll be able to click on those to be able to see what an accessibility statement looks like. These are varied in terms of length and density. So we invite you to look at those at some point. Did you have any questions about an accessibility statement up to this point? I'll show you some examples toward the end of the presentation.
No, I think once I see the examples too, that'll kind of clear up anything.
Okay, very good. VPAT. This is the one that we're tremendously picky about. This report is voluntary because the federal government wanted to provide a non-contractual way for vendors to demonstrate as a course of transparency, not about perfection, how they adhere to various accessibility standards. Those are the items that are listed. Is it a Section 508, which is a federal statute? Is it the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or for something particularly international, the EU's idea of what accessibility is, which encompasses all of those and more. There is not a single VPAT that a vendor can give for everything they do. The VPAT is specific to a product and it has a shelf life. You can't do one and done with a VPAT. These are self-reported. The vendors can either do the reporting work within their outfit, or they can contract with an outside testing, but we ourselves do not do that testing. We don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that at this time. When the guidelines are presented, we are looking at the report as a way to see how the transparency is being provided about the accessibility or non-accessibility of the product guideline by guideline. These are red flags for whether or not we would trust the validity of a VPAT. If the vendor, upon request, asks what a VPAT is, for instance, if you reach out to a vendor you've never dealt with before and you tell them our Office of Accessibility Resources requires these two documents, and the person you're communicating with, your sales rep, the manager, sometimes is even the owner of the company, they ask what's a VPAT, you know that there's no time to be wasted. If you do need to use that product, service, whatever, we need to start talking about the exception paperwork. If they use numbering in the report that even though they did the report in the last 9 months, they used reporting that was made obsolete 7+ years ago, you know that there's not going to be anything useful. If they give themselves perfect accessibility, then that's probably too good to be true. Finally, if they say in the last two bullets, the evaluation method, if all they can come up with in terms of explaining how they arrived at the report, they don't have it, or they just say general product knowledge, then that's not particularly useful from a transparency standpoint. And then, like I said, there's a shelf life. If the VPAT was created more than 4 years ago, or it just got done in a rush this week, something to be concerned about. If in the case of a vendor that has a VPAT, and maybe they haven't done it in a while, so they have that obsolete wording, but they can be able to come to an agreement with our office on your behalf to work on it in good faith, we would have this accessibility roadmap, which is a non-contractual agreement to address the shortcomings of the previous VPAT, so that in a year, when we would ask the question, because our across the campus multi-year contracts require us to do this annually, if at the end of the negotiated year the vendor addresses the items that were shortcomings in an existing VPAT, this roadmap would be a way to put a Band-Aid on it and allow you to do the purchase, do the procurement without doing the exception paperwork. And we would hope that that would result in the missing up-to-date VPAT or VPAT. Roadmap is not absolutely required, but may be requested depending on where the vendor is. You cannot do a roadmap if there isn't already a previous VPAT to discuss. It has to be paired with a VPAT that's not in compliance, but the vendor is saying, I won't have it in time for your unit or department to make the purchase, but I want to demonstrate in good faith that we'll proceed and take care of this business. Okay, exceptions. If I don't have both a usable accessibility statement as well as a current usable VPAT or VPAT, then there is an exception process. We call that an AAP, or alternate access plan. No statement, no VPAT. This is our plan B. So the statement plus the VPAT is there. Now, notice I said in big and or. And there's a reason where in some cases we can do one or the other, but it's a really narrow window of what those can be. An alternate access plan is this workaround that is going to be articulated for the long term about how UNLV will, within the unit requesting the purchase, come up with support for a user or end product receiver to get around the shortcomings of the product. We do not engage the vendor at this point. So one way we can really tick off a vendor is they've already said they don't want to do the paperwork, and then somebody is confused, and I or Bridget discuss with you the AAP, and then somebody forwards this thread to the vendor. We are doing this because the vendor is no longer productive and useful to this. And if they could have done the paperwork in the first place, we wouldn't be talking about a plan B. So the plan B is wholly within a UNLV space. And so we don't deal with the vendor at that point. We work around them. It's not a free pass for the vendor, but it allows you to get what you need, knowing that you now have the responsibility to deal with this workaround. You will not necessarily, Lonnie, be the one who does the paperwork, but you might be the one who makes the request on behalf of somebody else. You're shifting the risk management concern from the vendor, which I put in the accessibility statement and the VPAT, to that unit. So if your unit is saying, Lonnie, make this purchase happen, you go ahead and do this. You do not need to ask our permission if you already know that this is the way things will have to go. But we are making the person who is going to be deemed responsible for the work around responsible for finishing this resulting paperwork with our office. We'll explain in a few slides what that process will look like. You cannot share an AAP with another department. If, for instance, the Office of Online Education wishes to use a certain product for which an AAP was generated, their workaround plan will be specific to the team in the Office of Online Education that would staff their prescribed workaround. In your unit, that would be a different group of people, of course, because you're not necessarily sharing the same team members. An AAP will be specific to that. It's also meant to be short term. It cannot be done short term. If we do the paperwork, at most we can use it for a second year, provided there are no changes in the details, but it's not an ongoing approval. Not even a Plan A approval is a one and done. We look at that year to year. On our website, we kind of break down what an AAP does, but we don't make the form available. Right now, we do the rough draft of the form on your unit's behalf. There's no reason for us to share that other than we do share when we do the conditional approvals, what we call the kind of permission, what the form will look like. That way there are not any surprises when 3, 4, 5 months later, we engage your contact in the department to help us finish up the paperwork. You're thinking hypothetically about this workaround. Reminder that alternate access is the workaround or exception. Okay. Before I go into the scenarios, do you have any questions about the VPAT or the general idea about which way you go in terms of no exception versus exception?
Questions at this time?
I have a few scenarios, and so that I go in and out of the content in a limited fashion. I'll come back to some of these items. You will get the the Google slide presentation. So the hyperlinks should be able to be things that you get to. These Zoom references are contained in your Google folder to come. So this particular scenario is the vendor's got the accessibility statement. It has everything they're supposed to have. They have various VPATs for any and all products that could be used in the course of trying to utilize the Zoom service. They're a plan A to go. Want to keep in mind that just because 1 year it's a slam dunk, as we know, the paperwork for the VPAT has a shelf life. 2024, good to go. 2025, good to go. But if the paperwork, the VPAT was last updated in, let's say, January of 2021, and we're now entering 2026, that VPAT will now be over 5 years old. That's not great. That's why we look at it year to year. We actually have some vendors that their oops is they may have a VPAT, but they got acquired by, or they are the acquirer of another business, and they delete their accessibility statement because the corporate entity changed, and then they're caught without it. So this is an example of where, fine, you have loads and loads of VPATs, but the disappearance of accessibility statement and the non-willingness to come up with it will force the requesting unit to consider the plan B or AAP process to get what they need / want. In a second scenario, this is one where it's not cut and dried because it's a cart versus horse scenario. You're going to contract with an outside entity to do your website. This is already complicated because we will have multiple layers of approval. If you're, for instance, wanting to use Squarespace or Wix to host something rather than use UNLV's Web and Digital Strategies to do all this work and host for you, you'll have to get that approved. Then the actual website design will need to be approved. We'll need an accessibility statement from the website designer up front, and then require completed no excuses VPAT at the end of the first year before we'll let the renewal of the work proceed. All of that is laid out up front because none of the purchasing related to this can be accomplished without our office being involved in the approval of the different prongs that result in this kind of scenario. Bottom line is, we really don't recommend anybody doing any outside website hosting and designing unless they're willing to be on top of that. And then our scrutiny, remember those 3 mandates, then the web accessibility oversight is still where we're going to be involved in the work of the website that's hosted in this particular way. If, for instance, we have something where we have a vendor that they are willing to negotiate, we will feed them a template for an accessibility statement. We will let them know about a VPAT, but we will still probably have to go to an alternate access plan for a year just to cover our tails because the VPAT won't yet exist. One of the things to keep in mind is that we really do not want to have less than 5 business days to process any previous / existing procurement. If you're renewing Canva, for instance, 5 days, 5 business days might be adequate. But if you're submitting something for consideration and our office has not dealt with your office on this specific one, our website and many others ask for up to 30 business days or 30 calendar days. So please give us some lead time, especially if the onus on getting the accessibility documentation, curation, research is on our shoulders. We can do this negotiation, and sometimes it's productive. Most of the time it's not, just because the vendors don't know what's going on. Very clearly, we've established that the plan B, one or more of the documents is missing, or if it is a VPAT and it exists, it is not adequate or is not valid, then we have a two-part process for requesting this AAP process. First, you start a brand new email, and then two, when our office gives the conditional approval, letting you know that you can proceed in the meantime with your procurement/purchase, we will tell you what the timeline is for what we anticipate for the completion of the paperwork. So the whole loop, the whole cycle is not completed until this is done. That includes the signing off on the alternate access plan by a department head, principal investigator, as well as the dean of the college. This is what the email would look like. So keep this slideshow in mind if you want to print it out. One of the things I would recommend is, if you are savvy with the use of Gmail, you can actually create a template so that you don't have to remember the wording for this. Where you would say purchase Z, you would just delete product Z for what you are requesting for purchase. And then in the email body, you put that there. If you're making a purchase or through a P card, you're probably going to need to include a quote for them. What we ask is that if you need to supply that additional paperwork, that's fine. We don't want to waste your time with you having to create any fancy wording. This is the wording we ask for. What happens is, when somebody gets creative, they don't give us the wording we want. This is the exact wording we want, with the exception of product Z. Going to pause right here. Do you know how to create an email template in Gmail?
I haven't done it for a while, but I have done it before. But I'm sure I could just Google real quick some instructions.
Yes. This is the thing that sucks up time for most people, is if they don't do this, they're having to figure out where their wording is they need to get. If you do this, you don't have to worry about how to word it. You don't even have to say anything more than hello OAR or something. These are the only two sentences that are going to do it. You telling us how wonderful the product is or how crucial it is, that's not any bearing. We are dealing with the content. Is there accessibility documentation, or we're going to do this workaround? We're not going to make an exception for the paperwork. This is the exception process. When we receive this, please allow at least a business day for somebody to get back to you about it. Then we will send you the terms of the alternate access plan and an example of the form that will come. Again, please do not include the vendor in any of these emails. This is just within UNLV, between purchasing, our office, and your office. Okay. Let me stop sharing. I am going to open up the collection here. I'm going to set up a small window up to the side, and I will show you some of the items that are in the folder that I'm going to share with you. So before I forget, I am sharing with you right now the presentation on its own, but I will share with you this folder after we're done here. Can you see this list of items starting with non-example underscore VPATs? Can you see that okay?
I can only see just your camera.
Okay, you can just see my camera. Okay, let's see if that window will show up here. How about now?
Okay, yeah, I can see the list now.
Okay. We have non-example VPATs, we have example VPATs, we have non-example statements, and we have example statements. This presentation that I just completed, this is there, and then this is the source one that we did earlier in the summer. There are various forms of VPAT templates. These are the ones before a vendor would complete them, and then we have them in this main directory. The most recent one, which means that if a vendor is starting from scratch that they would need to use, are these two. So WCAG would cover websites and mobile apps like something on your iPhone or iPad or your Android smart device. The 508 would be what you would call software, something you would install on a Windows computer, something you would install on a Mac computer that would use this 508. The one that's slightly older but still valid is this same pair, but from March 2022. We would be expecting in our office that any vendor that in 2024 is creating one of their documents for the first time, they're using something no older than these 2022 ones. So if you happen to be in touch with a vendor and they ask, what's a VPAT? You can share this if you want to. We can share it no matter what. Here is our generic accessibility roadmap form. All of these are shared internationally. This is not just a UNLV thing. The VPAT is international. The roadmap is international. But the statement format is prescribed in a web link that will be inside the examples statement folder. If you want to see what an alternate access plan template looks like, we have it in PDF, and an actual fillable version of that is right here. My plans are not to update it again until 2025, so it should be current. It shows as of February 2024. In the examples folder for statements, when I go into this, it opens a Google Doc. And this is where if you want to find out what's involved and what considerations need to be made by somebody who's wanting to create an accessibility statement, this is what we will send to a vendor if we feel like it'll be productive to negotiate with them for the creation of them. And then we have links to web-based versions of accessibility statements. This is Zoom's site. This is probably in the middle lower end of the length of an accessibility statement. They have certain features that they call out that subscribe to this description like I gave about what accessibility means. They state what their compliance level is. So what we have up to this point is demonstrating what they consider to be their commitment to accessibility. And key to the completion of what should be in a minimal accessibility statement is to report an issue, to provide feedback, ask a question. How do we get in touch with Zoom? What they happen to also have in this accessibility statement is a link to any and all VPATs that are available. In the non-example, I show items where we would be in our office saying, no, this is not an acceptable accessibility statement. For Synthesia, which some people are using, I believe, to make video recordings, they have this tip page and they say what they know about accessibility, but they don't actually say the two key things about what we're looking for. That we're committed to accessibility. And if you have a question, clearly this is how we want you to get a hold of us. So this is a blog post. When you go to their website, it's not within a policy page. It's not within a legal compliance page. It's not on a standalone accessibility commitment statement page. It's part of a series of articles. That's not going to be acceptable as an accessibility statement. In the Google Doc or the web file that we have here, we have some other links to others that would represent what we would not do. And if forced, we might consider this particular one here. But where it doesn't do a lot of good is just the fact that it's in a blog area. They actually go through and give us what they understand about accessibility, and they give us that support conduit, that email address, which upon lots of discussion, we said, okay, it's not great, but since they happen to have a VPAT, we're going to let it fly. Does that make sense? So the last two items, we have non-example VPATs and we have example VPATs. The VPAT is a very dense and long document, but what you would be looking for, should you decide that you want to look for it, is really going to be in the topmost page there. Our office would be tasked with interpreting it, but just the fact that the VPAT exists is not good enough. We are going to be looking for, in a useful VPAT, that they say what the product is in terms of where it fits, particularly in their product line, that it has a date of no older than January 1, 2020. There's an email address for contact, and they say evaluation methods used, and they delineate specific tools and setups or both for what they utilize to come up with their report. Again, this report is not about perfection. It is about transparency. So long, lots of stuff. When you have a report and you have supports, it's not necessary for the vendor to put anything in remarks. A lot of the better ones do, to make sure that there is not any question about how they approach a particular discussion. For Microsoft and the Microsoft mobile version of the applications, they have a corresponding one that's based on a different version of the VPAT, which is the WCAG. The version for software is the 508 one. We see that this VPAT was created less than a year ago, so it's going to be good for a long time. So you pretty much know that if this was approved in 2023, that it would still be good in 2024 and 2025. 2026, we'll have to see. Microsoft has a great accessibility statement, so we're not going to be worried about that. With regards to VPATs, these are the ones where it's really cut and dried. Either a vendor does way too much in a VPAT, or they don't do enough, or they just let it be old. In the particular case of this PyCharm VPAT, for example, You see that the date of the VPAT is 2017, May 2017. I already said that if it's older than January 1, 2020, it's already old. That's the end of the discussion. This particular vendor, we've actually asked them year after year for getting a newer VPAT, and they just say, nah, that's it. So we consider that to be kind of like the middle finger to us. Even though they do lots of government work, a lot of government entities don't actually look at the paperwork like they're supposed to. I can't account for that. I just know that my responsibility to you all and to the university is to do my due diligence. And when I see something like this, it is an instant no-go. UNR would not accept this either. One of the things that's a smoking gun is this section 1194.21, whatever, 22. This numbering is what I was mentioning in the slide that is obsolete. This became obsolete in the spring of 2018. That's 6 years ago. They've had plenty of time to do that. They're working on updates to their software. They probably updated their software no less than 10 times since 2017. The report should get kind of contemporary to the versions that they've got, because the software that they rated here is not what they're still selling to the public. That's a failure. In the case of something that's newer, the vendor just didn't do their homework. They delivered a VPAT where the agency that was working with them had left for them, well, you're the company, you filled this out, and they distributed this. So since August of 2020, they have unleashed this version not done. So, we're here at UNLV, we're a university, so the term not doing your homework is kind of apt, because they literally didn't do what they're saying they were supposed to do when they had that. So that's going to be a no-go, and I wouldn't even do a roadmap with that. This is another one where, even though the date of the VPAT is in 2021, they used the wrong numbering system, the one that went obsolete in 2018. No go. You can't just get away with using an older version of the form and the numbering and put a newer date on it. Everything has to align appropriately. Okay, and let me do this last one here. We have this particular one, end user and expert knowledge. In this particular case, this was something that was devised by a local company who is excellent to work with, but they were doing it for the company that makes the software they choose to use. Unfortunately, the company that actually makes the software doesn't want to come up with an accessibility statement. So this VPAT that really isn't under the control of the actual installer of these. So a lot of the locking systems across campus are managed by the software. So facilities basically has to do an alternate access plan no matter what each year. They've been using it for about 4 years going with us. So they just do the process over and over again to be able to do that. And those are the collections that we have for you. And so I will stop sharing here.